Boom, according to that, I am live. Welcome. This is Tokyo Tonight. My name is Hiko Simon. That is the cover screen for this. Good to see people in there. Always a little bit sad, I guess, when I make my own comment first. But I suppose a quiet week in some ways, not in others. Kind of globally, it seems to be going a bit crazy at the moment. Very glad to see all of you in here, including Cobras Tenshi. Thank you for making it. Yes, the Dr. Becky video. What was the video again? I haven't seen one of her videos for a while, so I must have missed it. So if you could just drop a link. I was hoping, actually, yes, if I could get it before the show, I'd open it up, because it gets to the end of the show and I just get really tired and go and lie down and go to sleep. And that's probably what happened last week. I missed it, so I'm sorry about that. But send me the link again. I'd love to check it out. I'm watching pretty much non-stop space stuff lately. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Quinn Rankin, good to see you. We've also got Dan H. Good to have you in here, Dan H, as always, as well as Ada Void. Good morning, Arizona. Good to see you. And everybody else, hope that you are all safe and well, particularly getting a little bit gnarly in other parts of the world. Interesting in places like the UK, where, of course, coronavirus is going crazy, but the daily deaths still horrible at like 100 deaths or so per day over there, but not going up, matching the numbers of cases, implying that while not good, I'm not sure I'd still want to mess with Omicron. I'm definitely going to get another booster, but at least it sounds like people are not dying from it as much. I still wouldn't want to deal with all the other aspects, though, like long COVID. Even people who get mild cases end up like losing their sense of taste and having hair. Well, not that I care so much about the hair thing, but the headaches and other things like that. So I still don't want to mess with it. I'm still going to get my boosters, but there again, good to see that it doesn't seem to be as virulent as the others. But the speed, the cases in Korea, the cases in UK, cases in America are pretty scary. For what it's worth, I will talk about where we're up to with Japan. Of course, we extended the travel restrictions this week on foreign returnees, and indeed the Japanese quarantine system has had a few hiccups, which I'll also talk about. I'm kind of hoping, in a way, we get, as much as I wish, I hope this whole thing ends, I almost wouldn't mind if there is a new variant, just because of the number of people I see on TV mispronouncing Omicron. What is it? And you know what? It only seems to be English speakers that seem to be prone to calling it Omicron. It drives me, it's like calling a dog a cat. Why would you call it something else? It is part of the great English language tradition of coming to places, being told what those places are called, and then either mispronouncing them or just ignoring that and changing the names completely. That does seem to be how this language works. Coming from a country in New Zealand where, we've just recently gotten around to fixing the place names in New Zealand that are based on mispronunciations of Maori names. But, I guess a lot of places going through that. But, Cobras Tenshi, it's just the nighttime news. The solar I'm definitely going to talk about the solar news. Everything's catching corona right now, including the Parker Solar Probe, indeed, although very, very cool. Great to see Aaron. Great to have you with us. BTC Chiba, peace. Good to see you. DJ Sunnyside Up. Good to see everybody, the whole gang rolling in. Good to see you all. Hope that you're all well. Not an awful lot of news from Japan. I suppose that one story I have not included just because, I don't like to do crime stuff. I just find it just makes it overwhelmingly negative. But of course, I think I have to comment a little bit on the terrible thing that happened down in Osaka this week. The not clear exactly. No one's actually said that it was a mental health clinic, but that appears to be what it was. There's a lot of people talking about people who are suffering from workplace-related stress and whatever, and will go to this clinic for help getting back into society. And yet one of the patients of that clinic, a 61-year-old man, it now seems, went in there very much like the Kyoto animation case, where he went in, probably poured out some accelerants, and actually apparently actively tried to block and obstruct people from leaving, herding 27 people into a very confined space where he set a fire and they all died. And like in the Kyoto animation case, the mass murderer, there's this funny thing, when you kill 27 people by fire, there is a tendency for the media to call them arsonists, like what they did was light a fire and these people died in the fire. But he murdered those people. I mean, it sort of is like, if you shoot somebody, you don't say that he's the gun trigger puller. You say that he shot them. Yet somehow when, it's kind of, arson's one of those funny things that people talk about, how they sort of separate the fire lighting from the consequences of it, particularly when it's intended. But clearly this person just deliberately killed a huge number of people. In a very sad case when you consider the circumstances, the location, and the help, and the role it apparently played in the community down in Osaka, actually helping a lot of people overcome stress and, getting particularly, being able to work and so on. A lot of people talking about that for whatever reason, and someone in 61, what they're doing, killing a bunch of people, is very, very, very annoying. And I am and remain in principle against the death penalty, but of course when someone does something that's terrible, it's hard to feel any sympathy for this person. It turns out, in hospital with serious burns, it appears, and kind of fighting for his life. Yes, certainly I think when it's all done, he'll certainly be like the Kyoto Animation case, probably facing a death penalty case. So we'll see what happens with that. Certainly it's hard to feel sorry for him, even though I disagree again with the death penalty in general. And in any case, I mean, life sentence would be without question the appropriate sentence here. But pretty awful case. Again, highlights the thing that you definitely see in Tokyo and in other cities and everywhere in Japan, just that space is at such a premium, and there are so many, not only so many just routinely tall, like sort of nameless buildings, all like rows of 10, 12-story buildings crammed together, but indeed, it's standard for most of these not to have, only to have one way in and out with an elevator, no fire exits, no external stairs or anything like that. And perhaps there is an opportunity here to consider, not just in a case like a fire like this, but things like earthquakes and other things which are likely to happen. Are these buildings really safe? There was a fire, kind of a similar circumstance, in a building in Kabukicho, about 20 years ago, just after I first got to Japan, where this happened. Anyway, scary, awful case, but one thing that's going on anyway. But other than that, not a lot of big news stories, other than just watching with nervousness whether Omicron is going to, well, not actually whether, when and how Omicron is going to make it into Japan and how it's going to spread. It is almost inevitable. We actually reached a new peak today, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. So everyone's kind of bracing for it at the moment, but we still are in a remarkably good situation for all things considered. But pretty tough everywhere at the moment. Magpie882, good to see you. What up, y'all? Indeed, good to see you. Dan H, heard that the BOJ are tampering with the money printer as well. I've not been keeping up with that. Obviously, you mean they're talking about printing more money again? It is amazing to me. I don't really understand how they've gotten away with doing the printing incredible amounts of paper money, and where they did that in Nazi Germany and Argentina and Zimbabwe, it never went well. It generated lots of inflation, but it's not the case here. But it seems like they're trying it again. I mean, they don't really have anything new to try. Interesting, of course, that Kishida is really leaning on the employers to raise wages, including threatening to withdraw government tax breaks and so on for companies that don't raise wages. So looking to bring out the stick now, which is a good thing. But yeah, certainly if they can get money circulating in the economy, of course, that's not going to happen if we are back down into COVID restrictions. But still, like we've said before, while Japan is either ignored or mildly mocked for the way it's kind of handled COVID, including things like go-to travel, which I have mocked myself, by the way. Some of these things didn't seem very well thought through, and indeed how Suga wasn't really seeming to do anything when other countries were doing things. You have to look back at the last nearly 2 years now and say that for all the mocking, I think Japan has actually kind of shown itself. It's shown me to be wrong, I think, in some ways. I think that the go-to travel thing, like a lot of things, there's a lot of iteration of these ideas, but certainly the way that all of the soft measures, and without any hard measures, and that seeming like a disaster, but the soft measures seem to have added up to a good sustained general compliance. and as well as economic measures and so on, seem to have also worked quite well. And I actually think it's a good idea to use a lot of these stimulus measures that the Japanese government's done that, again, look cynically just like throwing money at interest groups, but actually, are looking like they might have been smarter ideas, so who knows. But yes, indeed. Anyway, I think I said hello to Magpie882. Good to see you. Osaka, yeah, that was some awful stuff. Jex Ashbolt, good to see you. Welcome. Linus360, good to see you. Is a bachelor in economics worth anything in Japan as a foreigner? Sure. Yes and no. A bachelor in economics isn't really it's valued differently. Times are changing, and I don't know if things are quite seen as the same as 20 years ago when I graduated. And when I was out 20 years ago, honestly, you could have had a degree in finger painting, and so long as it was from a good university, they didn't care what your grades were, and they didn't really care the substance of what you studied. It was just assumed that would show how smart you were. So, to that extent, there are a lot of people who studied economics and have bachelors for that in university, and they use that for whatever job, relevant or irrelevant, that they would go on to. It's not like, you become an economist per se. You could go into any number of jobs from that, including having a regular degree used to be enough to qualify to even be a high school teacher anywhere. You didn't have to go to teachers college. I think now there are teachers college requirements. So depending on what you want to do, it helps. One piece of advice I always give to people in Japan is that rush, which I had myself to get to Japan. Don't set aside trade qualifications and degrees and other certifications to come to Japan. Japan's got this problem in a way. There's this drug that in normal times you can come to Japan and teach and find ways to get by pretty well and actually have a pretty good life in Japan. Where you're earning enough money and you can get work and whatever, but you're not really furthering yourself. You're going to end up going back to your home country where you haven't really done anything other than, perhaps developed skills at teaching and education itself. And this is sort of why I do think it is a good idea to be patient and to go and get those additional skills, whether it's a trade or programming or, other sort of certification. And getting those before you come. It was something that, I graduated a law degree, but I wasn't qualified as a lawyer when I came to Japan. And at the time I was okay with that. But when I realized a few years later, maybe I do want to do that, it was extra hard to go back to New Zealand and go get that qualification. So, I did that. And, I'm still okay with the way that I did things, and I'm glad that I also didn't, I focused on getting something where I could, I developed skills which were separate to just being an English speaker. But in the end of the day, I think it is a good idea. So having a degree is absolutely better than the many people who skip their degree or come here midway through a degree and then they have to start from scratch all over again. Better to come here and use your degree for something that you can build on if you go back. And certainly it gives you a better place if you want to go and join a regular company. So it depends on what you're going to do, but it is certainly worth something. It sets you aside from the people who don't have a degree and aren't considered ready to enter a regular sort of workforce, sort of corporate jobs and so on, if that's what you want to do. So that's a long-winded answer, but Linus360, absolutely. I mean, again, it still comes down to what you want to do, but definitely better to have than not to have. Anyone got squirrels for me? Bring the squirrels. Kang and Kodos, good to see you. Who else we got in here? We've got Lucy, helps you with the visa. Certainly would help you with the visa as well if you want to get that arts humanities thing. Just the same as it helps with jobs. It helps you get sponsors for jobs, so certainly. Degree in finger painting. Hey, don't mock it. I mean, Jackson Pollock, he became a world famous. Pretty much that's all that he did, right, was finger painting. I mean, I like it. I dig it, but yeah. The start of Hiko's Shawshank Redemption. Yeah, except in my version, he never got out. But yes, indeed, the Shawshank Redemption. What would be a Japanese title for, what would be a good myself version of Shawshank Redemption? But yes, indeed. Jack Ashbolt, that's why you did your robotics and control stuff, even if you didn't get a degree. Now you're working full-time, getting a degree of finger painting part-time. Actually Japanese. But that's exactly... Jack Ashbolt, you are doing what I think is the best thing to do. I think the best thing you can do, particularly until you're like about 30, is certainly what my strategy was. It was always around trying to move in the direction that I want to go, not being tied down to anything and focusing on maximizing options. I think if you're under 30 years old, over 30, other pressures sort of come along, and you do generally then have to figure out, okay, what is your trade and what are you going to double down on? Not to say that you can't actually totally start over again at 30, but generally when you're 25 or 26 or 28 or 22, you can stop what you're doing and change your job entirely. And I did that, a couple of times. And in the end of the day, doing that and having a couple of different career directions has pulled together and worked really well for me. But this is why. Do the Japanese thing, but do something else. Don't leave it too late to do something else, or you'll find sometimes people find they're stuck. Dan H. Not mocking calligraphy, although maybe I am. I mean, you can interpret that how you want to read it, but yes, indeed, not that much dis. Didn't entirely miss it. You didn't miss it at all. I just got started. It's nearly 11 o'clock. I haven't started on the topics yet. G'day indeed. Let's get into the topics that we have. So first one, where are we at with COVID today? I must say, things are getting worse, but they are still not bad. The total number of people, for example, today, this is based on Saturday numbers, 177 new cases in the country. That means 25 people with COVID caught at immigration going into quarantine, entering the country. So that's quite a large number. If that was a prefecture, that would be like the second largest in the country. So they're catching them, and they're catching people with Omicron coming through. But so far, as you can see, most of the country, 0, 0, 0, zeros all over the place. However, the big cities, Osaka, 13 cases. Nagoya, Aichi Prefecture, only 1. They're doing excellent. But Yokohama and Tokyo, Kanagawa, they're 22, and Tokyo, 33. 33 is the first day. There was a day during the week, like Thursday, where it got up to 30, but this is the first day it's gotten over 30 since like early November. So a little bit of an unfortunate milestone. And the week-over-week numbers is it was going down to like 10 cases a day, and there was like 17 per day last week, and now it's like 30 per day. So those R numbers, those multiplication numbers are going up. And we know for a fact that there have been a couple of people I'm about to talk about in a moment who have been ignoring quarantine rules and have been out in the community with Omicron, and it was discovered later that they attended a soccer match. So this, that, and the other, the wheels are, there's no way of keeping this out. In fact, it's just like, for example, by the time they discovered it in South Africa, and this became called the South African variant, and everyone started treating South Africa like it had cooties. Turns out now it was in Europe and was probably in America before it was identified in South Africa. South Africa was getting penalized almost for having scientists good enough to catch it, which is a shame. And this is the problem with geographically. It's like the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu wasn't from Spain. It was from American soldiers in World War One. It was the American flu, but they blamed it on the Spanish, partly because they're part of war censorship, that they were spreading it. So that's unfortunate, but the point being, it's probably been in Japan already as well. Although, I guess if it had been in Japan, maybe the numbers would be going crazy, but it's inevitable it's going to arrive anyway. Just the fact that we've seen cases of people who have had it and it's come back again. But that's the situation there. Also, some people were asking about the vaccination rates during the week, and it turns out that NHK has an excellent page with all the statistics, in fact almost too many statistics in terms of the vaccination rates for the population. The one number that they don't have that some people are talking about is some countries are putting an emphasis on the percentage of people fully vaccinated out of the eligible population, i.e. they don't vaccinate people under 12 years old, so subtract that to make the number look bigger. I think that's what they do in Australia. In Japan they don't do that. They just do that as part of the total population. With the idea that ideally we're aiming for 80% of the total population. So the latest numbers, or at least as of the 17th of December, which is a few days old now. So hopefully we're getting close to 79.1% single vaccinated and 77.6% double vaccinated. Not bad for a country with 0 vaccine mandates, completely voluntary. it's got the for different age groups, it's got the vaccination rates, and you can see lowest vaccination rates are for the 12 to 19s, partly because they were vaccinated last, partly because parents worried about vaccinating their young kids even if they're eligible. I mean, you kind of get that, but still remarkably high. Double vaccinated 73% of younger kids. In some of the groups, when you get like to the 80-year-olds, 96% double vaccinated. So, pretty high rates within each one of the age groups. Certainly jumps at the 50s and above, where it was emphasized that there was higher risk, and where there was a particular emphasis on vaccinating people over 50s and people in 20s, 30s, 40s that had to wait. But still very high, pretty high rates in Japan. There's the overall progress to get vaccinated. Japan was slow, it was late, but better late than never. The other thing I find really interesting from all this data, and there is a lot of data here, is the prefectural data. Double vaccination rates by prefecture. What really stands out here is that very last one, Okinawa, 66.85%, markedly less than anywhere else. Second worst, just eyeballing this, is Osaka, 73.66. That's remarkable, because at times Osaka's had the worst rates in the country. Okinawa's always had the worst rates per population, and they've had like 33 people, I believe, in Camp Hansen in Okinawa. US troops have also, have been coming in with it. So there's that extra vulnerability with the mobility of US forces, but on top of that, the prefecture itself, it's kind of funny, they're reluctant to get vaccinated. They have the per capita the highest rates of COVID in the country. When the government was asking voluntarily early closing of izakaya, of Japanese bars, Okinawan government said, oh, that's not going to work in Okinawa. So, yeah, they seem a little bit, Okinawa has always been considered a little bit, because it was, basically administered by America until, 1975. Economically, and in many other ways, it was integrated into post-war Japan, 30 years after the rest of Japan. It's always kind of lagged a little bit economically and socially, and it's lagging behind on these as well. Just an interesting phenomenon. The fact that Osaka is like the second worst is kind of startling. Again, partly because the way that the vaccines were distributed favored low populated prefectures first. Urban prefectures got them last, which was alarming. But Tokyo, by comparison, however, if I go, Tokyo is at the top of the screen there, 76.2%. So not in the highest. There are a couple there over 80, but still doing relatively well. And again, you're in high risk here. But the very highest vaccinated prefectures, like 82.8% there. You got Akita Prefecture. A lot of rural places, but that's how Japan's doing anyway, if you're interested. So interesting anyway, with no vaccine mandates and hardly any cases, everyone is is getting vaccinated, and more or less. Another interesting thing was, I made a kind of offhand comment on Twitter that perhaps I was just poking the bear a little bit, but I saw pictures like Japanese coverage of Europe, and how the situation there is getting pretty dire by the looks of things, like going up to 10,000 cases per day, and how Omicron, which certainly we look at as probably being our future here in Japan as well. I mean, hopefully the numbers won't get that high. But 10,000 cases per day. Yet when they show street scenes in UK, street scenes of people walking around outside on the streets, people aren't wearing masks, or you'll see a couple, but most of the people in any photo shot that you see in the media coverage here is shows people without wearing masks. One person reacted to that on Twitter saying, oh, this is just the Japanese media trying to make the British look inferior. Everyone I know in the UK, everybody wears masks when they walk around, and in fact you have to, there are rules. I was like, okay, I mean, maybe NHK is just trying to make British people look inferior. I don't know, but I'm just surprised. To me, it's become honestly like wearing a burqa. I feels like a rule. I go out, I run, everything I do when you go out, and everyone I see, it's pretty rare to see anyone without, not wearing a mask when you go out here. It's just become the norm, at least where I am in Tokyo. And it is jarring to see places which aren't like that, especially when they're so much worse off than Japan. And yet at the same time, well, some British people said, oh no, this is not true, this is propaganda. How a photo of a street scene is propaganda, I don't know, but they said, oh, they're just being selective with the photos. But then other people were responding, in fact, more people were responding and saying, apparently in UK and Europe and some other places, the rules for wearing masks are only indoors and in enclosed spaces, and when you're outdoors, there isn't seen as being a risk. So people don't have to wear masks. And some people jumped on further and said, in fact, it's silly to make people wear masks outside. It's only when it's inside. You're being silly if you're wearing masks outside. To which I responded, well, we've got 30 cases per day and you've got 10,000 cases per day. I'm going to keep wearing my mask if it's okay with you. And some people took that badly, although I suppose I intended it badly as well. And, touch wood and all that, it hasn't started here yet. That's the thing. So it could be just as bad. A lot of people, but it's funny how people aggressively came back and said, oh no, wearing masks outside doesn't make any difference, so we shouldn't do it. Well, I don't know. Something's obviously not working where you are, so I'm glad to be I'm glad to be in Japan. I used to wear a mask if I had hay fever or if I had a cold to not bother other people. So I guess it didn't, this huge sort of psychological resistance to wearing masks just was never present in Japan. And, I think it shows that you're just being considerate. And people say, oh, it's just Japanese being conformist. The kind of, the sheeple tag for Japanese people. Oh, look at them, says he's wearing masks. No. Just being sensible. Again, we don't know that it is going to protect us from when this thing hits. It's probably not spreading as much as it's likely to soon. But I mean, the good news is that for as bad as things are in the UK, and they are pretty bad, you look at how the soccer's been wiped out this weekend. Nonetheless, the deaths are not increasing very much, which is probably both the impact of many people being vaccinated, as well as perhaps this variant being more mild. That said, we don't know that the variant after that's not going to be mild. So, scary times. And unfortunately, the other side effect of this is, of course, that Japan has again reinstated or extended the restrictions that were only for December. They've extended them into next month for foreigners coming into Japan, at least non-residents. So resident foreigners and Japanese can come in through quarantine, but non-resident foreigners, students, business visa workers, and so on are restricted from coming back into Japan. That's being extended partly out of a hope of being able to keep it out of the country, and partly out of fear of the rates that are happening in other countries, which is sort of reasonable. I mean, right now, from a Japanese perspective, it's just like when they discovered Omicron in South Africa, and they blocked off travel to South Africa. Well, right now, that's the situation with US and UK, and it's going to be the same here at some point. Some pointing out the futility of that. This is the perfect case. This is the story of the people coming into Japan at the moment. Although some people, I don't fully understand this. Some people are being forced to stay in hotel quarantine, and in fact, there's been a lot of people complaining that they arrived in Tokyo because they live in Tokyo, and they were told that they have to spend a couple of days observation in a APA hotel, APA hotel, which they thought fine, but it turns out all the quarantine hotels in Tokyo are full. So a lot of these people are being put onto domestic sort of on flights, and they're being sent down to Fukuoka. They're being sent to the opposite end of the country sometimes to go and do their hotel stays, and people are complaining about that. But at the same time, there are other people, like the case of a woman who came back from America and was voluntarily quarantining at home, or voluntarily self-isolating. And apparently, as young women in their 20s just back from America may want to do. I mean, who knows what happened exactly, but apparently a male acquaintance came over. They watched some Netflix, and a couple of days later, he had both she and he developed. She developed a fever the day after he stayed over at her place for more than a day. And then the day after that, he developed a fever and started coughing. And then on the day after, 2 days after that, they thought, well, then they started interacting with other people, and they were both sick and had fevers. And then they thought, you know what? He thought, I should go and watch a soccer match at a full soccer stadium with 80 people in close proximity. I guess he had tossed a coin, either go to a hospital or go to a soccer match, and he went to the soccer match. He went to a hospital, of course, the next day after the soccer match, where he was diagnosed first with COVID, and the day after that with 2 days after that with Omicron. So it's probably already out in the community. This is the point. And it kind of hurt a bit that after that, like the day after the story, that Omicron was more or less let into the community by these people, Japanese people, not following the quarantine rules. That the government decided to crack down on foreigners entering the country, as if that's the problem that they need to be policing. So in the end of the day, I mean, I don't think you can do anything about this. You can just try to minimize it, but it might already be, the fire might already have been lit just from this. So, we'll have to see what happens. But what can you do? When they say with 80 people, apparently he was sitting, they've been experimenting with having soccer matches with full crowds, like without distancing anymore, just because things have been going so well. And I think he attended one of these experimental games where they had a full stadium. So, they've identified 80 people is close. So that's not good. Before I go on any more, the other thing that of course is while the impact on students people wanting to study in Japan, who have been putting off for up to 2 years now, as well as people waiting to work on Japan, a lot of people feeling a lot of pain. And certainly I can understand that, waiting, putting off for a year, to wanting to come and study in Japan and become a Japan studies expert, or for whatever reason or whatever for studying. The fact that you're paying for this as well, you're not being paid, so it is significantly disruptive to life. You're putting your whole career back. It's not like you can do a backpacking, world travel gap year in the meantime either. So people's lives are really on hold over this, and it's taking 2 years, and a lot of people are screaming over that. But from a Japan perspective, honestly speaking, the awareness of the student thing is there. It has been raised in the news by universities. But the real thing that's standing up right now is where particularly the apprentice visa system is being used to hire farm workers and caregivers, particularly from Vietnam and Philippines and Southeast Asia, which make up the vast majority of foreigners who are in Japan. The farmers pointing out that it's going to actually make it impossible for them to be able to manage their farms, because the whole reason they set up these schemes is that they couldn't find enough workers, or at least not at rates that would allow them to sustain their prices to be able to run their farms. Which, by the way, is obviously, I've talked many times about the many problems with that, and the way that that's worked out is almost like indentured labor, and how that's been managed very, very poorly. But the other being caregivers as well, the number of old people's homes that need extra help and extra hands. And again, they're not paying these people more. They want to pay them, they want to keep the wages low. People don't want to pay for it. So they're trying to look for people from developing countries that can accept lower wages, and teach them Japanese and try to do this. But the travel restrictions are impacting on that at the moment. So Japan's in a tough spot. I do think personally, I mean, while I can understand it's kind of natural from every country that in a situation like this, you try to protect the population by limiting as much as possible people coming into the country. And you would always give your own citizens, and ideally your permanent residents like myself, extra privileges to come into the country. But in the end of the day, of course, it comes down to your quarantine strategy. Your citizenship doesn't lower the risk. It's not like a person from the Philippines has a higher percentage of likelihood to bring Omicron through quarantine than a Japanese person coming from the Philippines. Same DNA. So that's where we're at the moment anyway. They are restricting travel, and that is a pretty standard approach. But there again, it is hurting the economy. It's hurting all sorts of parts of the economy at the moment, but it is what it is. In fact, as we're doing all of this when the numbers are still incredibly low, and this is part of the effort to keep it low, but I think it's obviously the dam may have already broken, so we've got to wait and see. Into the comments. Boom. Let's go back up. I went for quite a while there, so I'm sure that there is a way to go back here. Here we go. Mocking calligraphy. We just had that one before. Kerberos Tenshi. There is an interesting YouTuber just recently strapped a 2,200 pound rocket motor to a Christmas tree. Send you the link later if I like. Yeah, that sounds morbidly interesting. That sounds. I wonder if they reached orbit. Magpie 882. The whole point of Alpha Delta Eta etc. is to avoid meaningless connections with countries or people, which of course was perfect for the C variant. That was the same as the name of the president of China. But yes, I know what you mean. Indeed, and this is why it's awful that they were using country name variants and that those associations were being made. Your relaxing space. Well, you are exactly correct. It showed up in South Africa because they had good scientists to find it. And how it didn't show up in Europe or America when we now know it was present there, like beforehand. It actually, yes. And the fact that like South Africa was punished for finding it is just ridiculous, right? So your relaxing space, I think you're absolutely correct. PB, good to see you. Have I heard of Asgardia, the space nation? Oh, I've heard. I mean, this is another one of those sea land, and there's a few of these kind of quasi scam nations that issue passports and stuff like that. Is if that's what I'm thinking of, Asgardia. I've heard of a few of those, but yeah, I vaguely recall hearing of it. Kathleen Watson, good to see you. That looks like a very, very spammy comment. Nobody put that into a search thing. Kathleen, you're the first comment you ever make, and why do you do this to me? You make me want to block or do something. Well, I'm not going to, but yeah, spammers, bots. Kang and Kodos, what is interesting is that once people stop getting vaccinated, the number of cases dropped from 20,000 a day to 100 a day. Interesting. Yeah, it's crazy. It's almost like the vaccines work or something, and maybe it's the microchips in the vaccines actually cure the disease. Who knows? Thank you, Bill Gates. X the dog boy X, good to see you. The number of people around Osaka not wearing is increasing greatly. Yeah, and perhaps that's why cases are going up there. Poking the bear again. What can I do, Mr. Cordychap? Good to see you. Not that much, Des. Many people around with masks all over Europe. And still protesting all over Europe against the measures. It's really horrible here now. Common sense getting lost, apparently. I do get a sense that the more coercive is, and maybe this is what Japan's done well. People think that Japan, you get this thing that, Japanese are all just very obedient and just do whatever leaders tell them to do, and that's not the case at all. I think it's the fact that it's all been voluntary has contributed to it working. Although I do know that, you do get that belligerent, fairly high, strongly belligerent percentage of people in any country, certainly in Australia, New Zealand, and maybe it is part of the culture that people do that. But maybe the fact that, when people are told, when there are police telling you to do something, there are people who will push back against that intuitively, and Japan hasn't had that. So maybe that's why there isn't the pushback. Who knows? But interesting observation, not that much this. Twitter be for trolling. Yes, it does. Dan H. Most people here don't care, and if they do, wear a mask. Yeah, they wear them below the nose. I've heard about this as well, that most of the people have their nose poking out, which, yes, some people consider to be like walking around with your pants lowered with the elastic, so that your bits are hanging out as well. But yes, they wear it below the nose. Also, none of the major supermarkets don't require you to wear a mask because of staff have been abused. Yeah, this was like with the plastic bags in Australia. They wound back the no plastic bags because the staff were getting abused. I mean, again, it's like the terrorists winning, but Japan is good. This is where you just don't have to deal with like these horrible people holding everyone hostage. I like that. Aaron, I would like to see what that link is. I'm curious. YouTube Creator Studio. It's doing that because I'm linking this from Creator Studio, so I'll try to open that later anyway, but I'm curious what that is. Assume it's legit. Magpie, you don't have a... Oh, there's so many comments here. Let's go back up. Magpie 882, you don't have a hospital soccer match coin? I do. I don't know what that means, so I assume I don't. Dan H, you are missing the true story about the butter stocks collapsing very soon then. Well, I actually deleted the story. I think I talked about this before, that there's currently a surplus of milk, which again just shows how the Japan Agricultural Cooperative Management of Japanese Agricultural Products here is like controls butter supply like a drunken driver. But yes, Magpie 882, biggest issue with the immigration rules is the impact on the dating pool. I don't think it's just the immigration rules and how it impacts that, but yes, I hear you. It does remind me how I think I've told the story before, but when I was playing rugby against the Yokosuka Navy team, and we were out drinking afterwards and talking about they're talking about where they're saying that they can spend most of the time on the base. It's got everything that they need, but when they want to go out and get some girls and have fun, they go into Roppongi. They like the girls in Roppongi. They're the type that they liked. And a lot of the girls who go to Roppongi, they like Navy guys as well. There's this one thing this guy told me. I used to like going to Roppongi a lot until one day something kind of clicked with me. I was talking with the girls in the bars there, and I realized that they knew the names of all the ships. And then you sort of look around at your crewmates and you think, maybe this isn't a good thing. But I know that the girls in Roppongi are probably wanting some new ships to roll in, certainly. Quint Rankid, isn't the Japanese government trying to raise wages? It is indeed. Why not make the farmers pay the laborers more? Well, now you're just talking crazy talk. Indeed. And you know what? It's partly wages, but it's also partly that people don't want to do a job which involves them getting dirty. Those farmers are all in their 80s, and they haven't raised anyone to take over the farms, and they haven't collectivized the farms in the way that modern agriculture is done in most developed countries, where it's run by big companies that sort of both automate and do work at scale and pay people to manage it. It's done by farmers who own plots of land, which wouldn't work in Japan's modern economy if it weren't for the fact that everything is subsidized up the Yueyang. So, it doesn't work without subsidies, and, the idea of toiling over a small plot of rice or over 3 cows just doesn't really appeal, even if they paid more, which they don't. So it's set up to collapse, and the Japanese government's trying to figure out what to do about that at the moment. But the Japanese agricultural industry is on the verge of dying of old age. Dan H, part 1 of 2. I can't read. Oh God, what's her name? I can't read the first character. Something no Yuko. The president of Rengo. Oh, okay. So the president of Rengo, the main labor union, same men told me I should definitely decline the offer, as only we were going to have the general election in October and an upper house in 2022, but next year's wage negotiation is also going to be tough due to the coronavirus pandemic. They said it was too difficult for a woman to handle the job in such a difficult time. That's right, the head of the current labor union, I forget her surname as well, but yes, the current head of the Japan labor unions is a woman. And interesting that, again, the employers' federations have been using the excuse of the pandemic, certainly, as putting a crunch on finances and why they can't increase wages. I mean, there's been an excuse every year for 20 years. One year there's been, everyone's been too healthy. The next year everyone has coronavirus. There's always, it's one thing or the other. So the government, it's interesting that the right-wing government, Rengo, which traditionally backs the Democrats, now actually has the LDP on their side on this issue. So yeah, interesting anyway, that they are on the same side, and they're not typically there. But frankly, the government's gotten kind of to the end of their tether with the business federation not playing ball. So yes, Kang and Kodos, Delta and Omicron rearrange the letters, media control. LOL. Yep. Anyway, let's get back into more topics. There's only 15 minutes left. Squirrels. So interesting thing happening with Australia right now. I certainly hope Australia doesn't end up in a situation. I mean, Australia's always suffered a little bit for its directness with its opinions about things, sometimes which are based on cultural perception. For example, the whaling thing. Certainly, issues with China have been going all over the place lately. I mean, China also becoming pretty much as direct as Australia is and being very unpleasant to one another. I hope that doesn't happen with Australia. I'm actually on the Australian side of this argument, but there's been The Age, one of the Australian newspapers, has taken up the not new case at all of the challenge of child custody disputes. And pointing out that Australian parents are unable to see their children in Japan, and the Australian government, as well as the French government and a lot of other international players, are starting to pressure Japan over the fact that, as I pointed out before Japan even signed the Hague Convention on Parental Aspects of Child Abduction, that the problem isn't just having international treaties to resolve conflicting child custody orders in different countries. It's the fact that Japan has basically a single parent custody system. Basically, it is a system which incentivizes one parent to either abduct or certainly to take access away from the other parent. And in fact, there is a cultural norm in Japan where, in the case of divorce, It is considered a divorce of the entire family. That includes extended family, but it includes, the non-custodial parent from the kids. There's typically no access. And while what's generally in most developing countries, family law is based on the principle of always trying to figure out what the best interests of the child are in a situation. And there is a general consensus in family law systems around the world that for the well-being of the child, access to both parents is in the best interest of the child in some way, if that can be managed in a way, without overwhelming, countervailing negative influence on the children. Like, for example, if a parent is violent or abusive or something like that, provided that there aren't those, the family court system is there to ensure some kind of manageable arrangement with joint custody. In Japan, the system has always been that it's confusing for the kid to have a parent who's not around or only around sometimes, and so one parent gets custody. And on top of that, there is no real family law system, and the consequences of having not just a problem of international treaties, of actual having conflicting philosophies on what the best interests of the child are. It means that in a lot of these international marriages that most of the time do not work out. Like, the divorce rate in international marriages is something like 55 or 60% in Japan. It means that you have these situations which are happening everywhere now, that with more and more interaction between Japanese and non-Japanese, you have a lot of situations of parents learning too late that they literally never get to see their kids again. And a lot of situations, they're not even divorced yet. They're still technically married, but they're sort of snatched away, and they have no recourse. There's no family law system which can give custody orders. There's nothing enforceable. It's all done voluntarily. And this is causing problems, particularly in cases where one of the parents, the Hague Convention is made for divorce cases with custody arrangements, but these are cases even when without formal divorce going through, a parent is just taking the kids, running off to Japan, and withholding access. And the government's taken this up, and the Japanese ambassador to Australia decided to speak up in defense of Japan over this. I think he was probably talking points from the foreign ministry, but what he said in response to these pretty legitimate, imagine the situation that you've suddenly had you're having marriage troubles, and then one day the other parent disappears with the children, and you can't see them, and maybe you know where they are, but you're actually blocked from getting access, even if you go over to Japan to get access. The Japanese ambassador to Australia, Shingo Yamagami, responded to a paper saying that basically Japan's legal system, when it comes to this issue of removal of children from one parent across borders, he is aware that their emotions are higher on both sides because the system is different. The system is different in Japan, and this becomes a source of confusion to Australians. Say a father cannot hold their babies after a divorce. Kind of saying that everyone's just confused because they're different systems. And he put out another system saying that Australians shouldn't be inflaming the issue. I think he was inflaming the issue, saying that the parents were confused. And he then went and gave the line that Japan complies with international norms, which it doesn't. Japan has different norms, but saying that Japan is like normal and everyone is confused has gotten everyone. It's actually inflamed the issue, which I think is a good thing. It'll in the end result in Japan is seeking stronger defense ties with Australia. Australia's looking to pivot away from China at the moment, so it should be having better relations with Australia. When you have an ambassador there poking this issue, it actually hopefully is going to incentivize Japan to again take a look at creating a family law system which doesn't exist right now. So unfortunate in a way that he said those things, but maybe good in a way that again it's going to, in the end of the day, it's going to backfire in a way that hopefully it'll prompt Japan to look at what it can do on this sort of thing. Magpie 882, didn't France do something recently about custody? Yeah, there was a specific case of a French citizen who was hunger striking in Tokyo, who similarly, I think, is divorced and doesn't have access to his children, although he might not even be divorced. But the French President Macron took that up and raised it, and the French government raised it with the Japanese government as well. And I think that's a good thing because, frankly, it's something that is that needs to be improved. A lot going on in the chat, but I'm not going to read it. We've got 5 more minutes left, and I'm just going to respond if people say at Mark Hiko Simon or just Hiko Simon. It will flash orange, so I'm going to move on. Space stuff too, very, very cool space things. The Parker solar probe caught corona. It flew through the sun's corona. Kind of crazy. So fascinating when you think about how the sun is there and people can see it, and it's quite big. It's about the same size in the sky as the moon, hence the eclipses almost perfectly match. And yet we know so little about it. I loved as a kid. I've got a telescope with solar filters where I could see sunspots and stuff like that. But in a sense, when we look at the sun, we only see the corona. We see the visible surface of the sun, which is basically like the flaming atmosphere. Yet what we've learned from studying the sun is that it's actually below like the outer edges of all the sort of the fire and everything happening above the sun, and basically going in these huge sort of explosions, going up and getting drawn back into the sun by gravity. Below that, it's actually much, much cooler. Like still thousands of degrees Celsius, but it's millions of degrees in the corona. And yeah, they actually this solar probe, like I believe it's the fastest object now ever created. It's actually flying like some crazy, like 500,000 miles per hour or something ridiculous. They've set it on this thing to go basically through the outer edges of the sun's atmosphere, like something like 50 times. They're planning to do this, and they're taking readings to basically try to understand better what's inside the sun or how the sun works. It is crazy that we study all of these stars. We're finding new planets and stuff all the time, and yet we really know very little about the star that's like right there and quite big. So crazy that this thing is flying into the sun. A lot of crazy stories this week. They found a huge pool, a whole huge resource of water on Mars. That's one crazy thing. There's more stuff being discovered with an Earth-sized planet around Proxima Centauri, the closest star to Earth, although it's not visible to the naked eye because it's so small. But again, that is something that you could actually send a probe to. It would, and reach within a lifetime at least. It's about 4 light years away. So crazy stuff happening at the moment in space. The other thing, of course, is the founder of ZOZOTOWN, Japanese billionaire, basically head of a fashion sort of Amazon Rakuten type site. He has decided to spend his money on 2 trips into space. He's on his first one at the moment. He's been on the ISS for a week with his Instagram social media manager, and he's been posting photos, and they're looking very nice. But he's also booked a trip on Starship. I believe it's Starship. He's going to be going, not landing on, but going around, circumnavigating the moon on a SpaceX flight, hopefully in the next year or so as well. And I must admit, while there's been a bit of a backlash at, all these billionaires wasting their money that should be collected in taxes on, joyriding in space, and I suppose you can add Maezawa-san to the list, I'm glad that they're doing it. And hell, well, one, if I had the money, that's what I would want to do. And all of this is, these are laying railroad tracks to the new world, as it were. These are where hopefully people are going to be living and working and, doing a lot to make the world better. And this is how you get there. You need some people to sort of go up there first. So I think it's super cool anyway. But that's just me. Mr. Cordy Chip, nothing to say here, just distracting me. Thank you very much. What else have I got? Oh, yeah, only one more story actually. Oh, I'm on good time. This series, I think I've talked about this channel, Extra Credits. I know if I press this, it won't just show the full thumbnail. It will start playing, and I don't want it to play. So don't play. Can I stop it? Stop it. Okay, I've got to go back. But basically, there's a series right now called Japanese Militarism. Basically, it's the history from the start of the 20th century until the start of World War II. And it's basically how militarists took over the Japanese government. And it is interesting because it is really not well understood. It is... there's kind of an assumption, speaking for myself on the assumptions I had, Hitler had, Germany had Hitler, Italy had Mussolini, Japan had Hideki Tojo. They were all military dictators. They all took over their countries through a mix of being elected or taking over by force. And they led their countries, full of fanatical citizens, that were all for it, into wars. Out of those three cases, Japan is the most nuanced. It was interesting that Japan had a relatively well-functional democracy. And within that, there wasn't even a Hitler-type party. There wasn't a political party or a faction that elected the militarists. The militarists were a very, very small, in a way like they are today, just a small, powerless, nobody cared for them sort of group. Well, when I say powerless, they had power, but they didn't have political power or legitimacy. Yet they sort of managed to intimidate and manipulate the democracy in Japan to put themselves in a position to be able to basically take control, regardless of who was in charge. It was kind of a military coup, but in very small increments over time, and where the Japanese government, where strangely enough, the popular media sided with the nationalist military people who often... The most rogue and renegade elements of the Japanese military were actually not under the direct control of senior military leadership. They were rogue within the army, and the popular press sided with them over the politicians and over the military leadership, which kind of forced the government and the emperor to go along with it was sort of a bottom-up process. And this happened over decades. So, it was really messed up. But it's a fascinating process, and it's not what you might assume is what happened. And this channel, Extra Credits, fantastic narrator, fantastic storytelling style, very compact, very efficient, very easy to understand. 2 episodes so far. Typically, I think this is going to be a 5-episode series with 1 per week. Each episode's only like 10 minutes long. It's really well illustrated, really well told. It's told in a kind of a fun way, like a way that you would tell it to kids and to try to make kids find it interesting, but it's really got all the nuances. Well, not all the nuances. This is part of what they do after each series, is they do a lies episode where they go through all the actual historiographical stuff that they deliberately edited out for simplicity or for narrative telling or whatever, and where they go through the mistakes that they made in summarizing it. But look, from my perspective, they're taking a really complex and nuanced thing, which almost nobody, even in Japan, people don't understand this sort of process of how Japan went from being a fledgling Western-style democracy to how it became, this sort of military-led, engaging in multiple invasions type of a country that it became. And the idea that it's something that's unique and weird about Japan is... probably another thing that happens a lot with Japan. It just seems too hard to understand, so people just dismiss it. But no, there's a lot of really interesting lessons to learn from what Japan went through. It's an excellent series. I highly recommend it. Go watch it and go subscribe to that channel on YouTube. We are up on time. One thing I definitely want to do sometime, I've been thinking about 2 videos I'd like to make lately. One is with YouTube collections in beta, and only selected or random, I believe, not even selected users have it. I don't have access to it, although YouTube give me access to collections, because believe me, you won't get better feedback from anybody than me, given that I've made an app that I maintained for 3 years that did the same function of what you're trying to do. But I can also tell you that without MyChan TV, what I have done to follow and keep up with my subscriptions and how I do that, it's I've got a good system for it, actually. And I've thought deeply about this, so I would like to share my system for keeping up with subscriptions and how I do that. That's one small video I'd like to make. Another video I must admit I'd like to make is to show my running routine. I've actually, again, it's something I've built up into something that I think is quite, it works quite well. Not sharing as a running coach perspective, of course, but as someone who runs regularly and has found a system that works pretty well, I would like to share that. So yeah, I might do some recorded videos at some point if I get some time. But yeah, that is all that I have on the show tonight. I just realized actually that next week when we talk, it'll be Boxing Day. At least in countries that have Boxing Day, December 26th. So I guess it's going to be December 24, 25 before then. Wherever you are in the world, I guess if you're in Europe, you're already doing the Christmas thing over many, many days. I come from a part of the world where we just eat too much on a single day, and then the day after we watch a cricket match and hang out and having barbecues and by swimming pools and not doing very much. I still associate Christmas with heat. And Tokyo is kind of like it's cold, but we don't get snow, so I don't get the TV version of Christmas that I always watched on TV in New Zealand. It's just kind of cold, but we'll have a low-key Christmas here. and wherever you are or however you celebrate the holiday season, all the variations, or whether you treat it as a commercial holiday, whether you treat it as a religious holiday, whether you treat it as whatever, for the time of year. We've got New Year's coming up, of course, and all those various end of year festivals, but I hope that wherever you are, that you are having a great time of year, that you get some time to rest and relax over the New Year break. Hoping that there's not going to be too much bad news over the next week to cover. I'm probably just going to show up here as part of the routine. I don't have any plans. It's going to be another week for us. We'll try to do a few nice things at home, but obviously pretty low key when you can't travel for it. So I will say Happy Christmas to everybody. Not saying that, trying to enforce religion on anybody, but just on a general, it's that time of year, and that's what I would grew up saying at this time of year. But certainly happy holidays to everybody. Hope everybody has a great week, and hope, obviously very challenging going through this time of year for a lot of people, particularly who are away from their families and unable to travel or connect with them. But I'm in that situation. A lot of people are in that situation. We are blessed to live in an age when we can talk and see people instantly. Think about if this were 80 years ago or whatever. I mean, we're always, as bad as things are, we're still in the best time to be alive that there has ever been, in spite of the challenges right now. So do make sure that you connect with your families. Do take care of yourselves, obviously. Don't get down at being separated if that's the situation that you're in. I think it's also a tough time for some people, but look, I'm here. I've got nothing else to do, and take care of yourselves. Have a good break. Remember, I'll be here 10:30 p.m. just the same as I am every other week at Japan Standard Time. You can follow me on Twitter. Have a good week, everybody. That was a long sign off, but maybe one final run through the comments. The shoes are good, PB. Actually, small thing, which may be too much information for people, but yeah, I've got a thing where, like, I slice through my socks from my toenails, and I worry that I've had them actually go through my shoe. I do trim my toenails, but like they're just, I think my toe is just an odd shape, where it just makes it particularly prone to opening like a hole in the same place on the shoe. So I'm kind of like really terrified of that right now. I'm actually thinking about putting like band-aids over my feet. The shoes are excellent. I mean, you can see my times on Twitter and Instagram. I'm running faster, and I'm not fitter. So they kind of force you, again, I'll explain this in more detail on a running video sometime, but yeah, it doesn't give you extra spring or help you run faster. It kind of forces you to run faster. Your feet are kind of tilting forward. They're like high heels almost. And so you're sort of like always up on your toes a little bit, which just forces you to run in a more accelerated pose, even if you're feeling exhausted and you don't want to. So they're not comfortable. The New Balances are comfortable, and I love those shoes, but certainly the Nikes are fast. They are great. Merry Christmas, Black Tengu. Good to see you. Let me go back. Great to see Shibas made it. Boom. So yeah, final round of comments. Isn't starting in the 20th century too recent? With the start of Bismarck would have been better. Influence of Bismarck. Well, they actually do talk about Meiji. In fairness, I think the first episode they talk about the Meiji Restoration, how they did the tour around Europe, and they borrowed a lot from Germany and a lot from UK actually for the modern political system. So yeah, they did talk about that. It's an excellent series. Go watch it. I do recommend it. Interesting how a very small group can change an entire country. Indeed, Quint Rankett. And I think it's a lesson that is not irrelevant in today's age either, in a lot of countries, even that seem very different. It's something that can happen. No one in Japan understands that transition. Not no one. It's just it's complicated and it's nuanced and it's taught in a particular part of history. But, the way that history is taught in Japan is that the entire history of Japan for 2,000 years is taught with equal allocations to every time period. So it's given the same emphasis as 16th century Japan as the unification. In fact, no question, the unification of Japan in the 16th century, or the 17th century, is given probably more emphasis than the 20th century failure of the Taisho democracy. To me, the failure of the Taisho democracy is far more important and far more relevant, but it's given a relatively small spot. So, for the Japanese kids who are forced to cram learn it for exams, and that really, the information is there if you're really interested in learning in it, but a lot of people come out of the education system not really knowing it. NHK does fantastic documentaries on it, so the information isn't suppressed. It's just, there's just a general apathy is the best word. There's just general apathy about it. PB, the shoes are good. So yes, I think I just answered that. Merry Christmas indeed. And Magpie, thanks. Let Nabe begin. Yes, Nabe very nice. The Linksy project, great to see you. File them to a rounded edge. Yeah, I'm doing that lately. I didn't care so much with the New Balance shoes. They're like $40 each, which I love those shoes. These are $300. They're custom made and they make me run fast. So now I'm paying a lot more attention. So yes, I am filing actually at the moment. I'm doing all of that stuff. Yeah, hey everybody, anyway, thanks, great as always to have you all in here. Great to see the chat going off. I'm gonna have a quiet week. I hope that you all do too, and I'll see you around. So have a good end of year and peace. Boom. Any show.